I want to start by letting you know there's almost always a way to do things differently if you just ask, which is the hardest part, yes. You may also be wary of this if, like me, you're always trying to be the world's most agreeable patient. But this whole experience really forced me to acknowledge how I was feeling and express like what I legitimately could not take. Ultrasounds. For example, this whole medical drama began almost a decade ago now when I had such severe period and pelvic pain, and they were like, hey, let's have a gander. And I was like, for sure, let's do a little scan. But I didn't realize when I went to do the scan that it was going to be done with a giant turkey baster rod type thing, and they were going to ram that rod into the main pain zone and poke around. And I was like, sorry, what now? The only thing that could have made this more nightmarish was the requirement to have and hold a full bladder the whole time. Machiavellian. So the nurse was like, oh, is this a transvaginal scan? And I was like, is it? But she saw my stricken face and was like, well, we could do like an outer pelvic scan. It's just not going to show us as much detail. And I was like, yeah, considering the amount of pain I'm in, that sounds like a great plan. So she did the jelly belly thing and got some pics, and even that was quite challenging and painful, honestly, because like the pressing on the pelvis, again with a very full bladder. If you've had a baby, you understand this and you're like, yeah, welcome to my world. But I had not been indoctrinated in this world, and it was hell. Apparently you need a full bladder to kind of space things out, like an inflated balloon to better see the organs, because everything is kind of like stacked and a tight squeeze in there. So yeah, I did that, and thank God. So over the years I've had many scans, and it was always okay to do the external pelvic ultrasound one and say no to the lightsaber one. You don't have to fall on your sword, so to speak. I also learned you can have an MRI, which is even more effective for imaging. The only reason that's not the first option is because the wait time is often longer. So all that to say, I know how scary it is to even seek help, and then in these situations like where it feels like the doctors and nurses or technicians all have the expertise and authority, which yeah, they do, it does not hurt to say, hey, is there an alternative option? Because oftentimes they're just used to doing something that one way, and I'm sure a lot of patients have just gone along with it just to be polite, or again, the world's best, most agreeable patient, while sadly adding an unnecessary amount of stress and pain to an already very stressful and very painful issue. PAPs. Same thing with pap tests. God, I've had some awful pap tests, like, ugh. And then I read about an at-home swab kit thing that was even more effective in testing for things like HPV and markers for cervical cancer. I was lucky that my province was already piloting this, so I simply ordered the kit, did the Q-tip swab thing, and popped it in the mail to the lab, and it came back with winning results. So the next time I got hassled to do a pap, and you know how you get all those letters, I said, say no more. I did the swab, and I flashed my lab results to my doctor, and she was like, oh, that's awesome. Okay, case closed. So again, I know it can feel like you're being extra or neglecting your health or being a baby, but there are many ways to skin a cat. And also, it's just sad and barbaric, like the lack of funding and research and training and treatment for all things women and health related. We know this. Like, I was reading this thing of, you know, like the forceps, the thing when you get an exam, and they were designed, of course, by a man, but also they haven't really been redesigned or reconsidered until a few years ago by some amazing lady entrepreneurs, or just entrepreneurs, who were like, wow, who said this was ever comfortable? And even with that, I read you can ask for smaller forceps. Honestly, I can't wait to just swallow nanobots and let them keep track of things, because I'm quite tired of the invasive tests in general. Though yes, having small bots in you could also potentially be invasive. Another thing I learned while doing endless blood work and researching symptoms and spiraling is that there actually aren't tests for every type of disease or cancer, which kind of blew my mind. Like, I thought if you at least had something like that, there was a scary test to see if you did. but it turns out not so much. So for things like ovarian cancer, there are markers like in blood and different ways doctors can kind of guess, but they can often be the same symptoms and markers that show for endometriosis. So all the more reason to be really vocal about your symptoms, which sadly do overlap with a lot of other things, and they can be misdiagnosed or simply missed. Even all the more reason, or at least an argument, to go the surgery route. And I will discuss, it was scary, but honestly, I'm kind of glad I did, because oftentimes they really don't know what's going on in there until they're in there. And no worries, because you're high on drugs and basically dead from a brainwave perspective, so you're not there. Yes, I wanted to heal naturally. I did a naturopath for years. I still work with one. I resisted birth control because I was on it and then I went off it. And we know Ricky Lake made a documentary on how evil it is. And I really wanted to balance my hormones naturally. But honestly, is it even possible in such an unbalanced world? I have glass Tupperware. I put baby lotion with no chemicals on my skin. I do a lot of crazy things and I'm pretty informed, but is there a level set to get back to, or can we at least tip the scales favorably and intentionally unbalance to counterbalance? Because the world is so toxica. Literally, when we moved into this place, it was a new building. I'm sure the paint and everything was off-gassing. And I'm sure there were endocrine disruptors, when I get a coffee in the to-go cup, it's just kind of endless and you'll go crazy trying to control it. When that was also something I struggled with, is the guilt and the shame of if I only ate the right things, or if I had worked out enough, or again, eliminated every possible toxin from my environment, I wouldn't be in this situation. I really felt like it was my fault. And now that I'm on the other side of this surgery, I feel again like it's my second chance to get it right. And I don't know, honestly, just do your best. I found it useful anecdotally. There's millions of women sharing their stories on Reddit, and honestly, it made me feel better to find ones that were I've been a healthy vegan and plant-based only for 20 years and I still had fibroids. I still tirelessly look for a solution, or the right way to eat, and honestly, all the stress of that also isn't helping. So I guess part of trying to let go of the guilt and the shame means giving up the idea that I have any control at all. And that's bigger mortality issues, and the Samara story where the guy can't avoid his death. You know that one? Let me try to find it. Okay, this is the story. A merchant in Baghdad sends his servant to the marketplace. While there, the servant encounters Death, who makes a threatening gesture towards him. Terrified, the servant begs his master to let him borrow the fastest horse so he can escape to the distant city of Samara. The merchant agrees, and the servant rides away at top speed. Later, the merchant walks to the marketplace himself and finds Death. Asks why they scared his servant with a threatening gesture. Death replies that they were not threatening him, but they were surprised to see him in Baghdad because they had an appointment with the servant in Samara that evening. Boom. So it's basically is there free will? Can you change your course in life? Is everything preordained or destined? I don't know. Again, depending on how you think about it, does anything matter? It's nihilism. I don't know. It's good news. It's bad news. I just want to be happy and live. But yeah, anyway, moving on. Enemas of the state. So another example of asking for alternatives was the bowel prep. During all my surgery prep, they were telling me what to do and blah, blah, blah. And almost as though it were so insignificant they forgot to mention it. They were yeah, oh, and just on the morning, 2 hours before you leave for your surgery, you just have to give yourself a quick enema. Sorry, what? And so surgeries are early in the morning anyway. And I was so you're saying at 3 in the morning, still asleep, I have to somehow like perform surgery myself and then shit my life out and be exhausted and stressed and then mess it up, be worried, and then go to this big surgery? Like, there's no way. I was trying to explain, like, politely to the doctor, like, I am not confident I can do this. It's funny how different things bother different people. Like, my sister hates IVs, whereas, like, I don't love them, but honestly, it doesn't really bother me. Like, for the surgery, I had 2 or 3 IVs, and one had to stay in for days on the back of my hand. Like, it didn't feel great, but whatever. Whereas, like, an enema or anything in that area, I'm like, no, thank you. Please do not. It is not the area for that. Whereas my sister was like, oh, absolutely, I could have an enema, no problem. And I was like, well, maybe you can give me one, because I am telling you, I don't think I could locate my asshole on a map, even if you showed it to me. So I was like, hey, yeah, I'm really not sure about this. Like, I was kind of at an impasse with my doctor, and they thought it was like the silliest thing ever. But then, again, just ask. And they were like, well, I guess you could do the, like, colonoscopy prep drink if you'd rather. And I was like, that sounds great. I am absolutely confident I can drink a disgusting drink and shit my life out, and I would much rather do that. And they were like, okay, the only thing is you can't eat the day before. And I was like, again, no problem. Thank you so much. So I'm very glad I asked. And again, if you're faced with this and you're like, wow, I am not confident I can even reach that location on my own, let alone, like, look at these things, look at these diagrams. Like, this is not something you want to do to be in the right surgery headspace. So, or maybe it is. Again, my sister would do it fine. She would nail it. So see, there's options, people. So that's what I did, and it was fine. And I also packed an overnight bag, even though we were planning for the best case scenario of a day surgery. Like, ideally, if it went well, I could go home that day. But I do recommend packing an overnight bag for peace of mind. Like, there's already a million videos about what to pack, and basically I brought socks, a nice diaper, period underwear, a beautiful caftan I bought on Amazon as my leaving the hospital look, and just like some toiletries like toothbrush, deodorant, hairbrush, whatever. It doesn't have to be crazy, but honestly, just for peace of mind, I was glad I did. So on the big day, I was surprisingly calm. It sort of felt like finally getting to your gate after a long slog to the airport and like a lot of security pat downs. They put an IV in my arm, which I was very brave about, even though it pinched and looked gross. Then, after a million more introductions to various surgeons who would be collabing on cutting me in half, and so many questions from the nurse, it was time to go to the OR. I hugged Jay, and I was sad and really hoping to see him again because I love that guy so much. And the main nurse walked a far way with me down the hallways, and then she asked how I was doing, and that is just always the magic question to pause waterworks if one is not doing so well. So I cried a bit and said, I'm just a little bit scared, and she said it's going to be okay, which was nice. When we walked into the OR, it was just like in the movies. A big, bright, high-ceiling room with lots of lights, and there was a bed in the middle. There were about 12 people in there, all standing around waiting to greet me, and I explained that it felt like a surprise party. Maybe it was, but it turns out it wasn't. It was still just a surgery. As my surgeon was reviewing what would happen, she held my hand and rubbed my arm, and I thought, wow, this is so nice. Like, I always thought surgeons had to be kind of cold-hearted, but clearly this is one that is not. I felt very safe in her hands, and the nice anesthesiologist, who in my mind was named Anastasia, gave me something to relax. And that part wasn't like in the movies when they get you to count down, because whatever that first thing is they gave me basically knocked me out already. And then they gave me other things too, but my last memory is being aware of sounds over top of me and seeing some shapes of doctors moving through a slit in my eyes and hearing them discuss their weekend plans since it was a Friday. And I thought, wow, water cooler talk really is water cooler talk, like across the board, even in this job. I received quite a crazy, detailed report after the surgery, most of which I did not understand, and then made the mistake of Googling some terms, which were very disturbing. But I thought I'd just share some highlights to improve our vocabulary. And if you are a doctor or studying to be a doctor, maybe it's like a quiz and makes sense to you. Yellowfin stirrups, sigmoid and bilateral sigmoid gutters, posterior cul-de-sac, left ovarian fossa, uterosacral, anterior cul-de-sac, small powder burn lesions on the right round ligament and paravesical peritoneum. Myomectomy performed. Palmer's point entry was undertaken. 12 millimeter port in the supraumbilicus. Pedunculated uterine fibroid. Over an hour was spent on ovariolysis and fimbriolysis. A slow and meticulous dissection was undertaken to normalize and separate the filmy adhesions of bilateral ovaries from the sidewall. The ureters were away at this time. We mobilized the ovary off the sigmoid. Perirectal space on the patient's right side. This was open at the base of infundibulopelvic ligament. Complete ureterolysis was done from the pelvic brim to the anterior division of the internal iliac artery. A slow and lateral dissection was undertaken where we ensured that the ureter was well away from all sites of dissection. There were some adhesions noted to the ovary, of course, but also to the lateral sidewall of the uterus. This was taken down. The endo catch bag and all specimens were removed, and this was handed off. The mass of right salpingo-oophorectomy and fibroid were then removed and handed off as well. When I woke up from the anesthesia, it was not a good experience. My friend told me that think of something nice when they're knocking you out, and then when you wake up it'll be nice. But I woke up like as though I had drowned and was like and I was in a lot of pain. And for some reason I thought if I keep my eyes closed that will be better. So I refused to open my eyes, and I knew I was in the PAC unit where they were making sure I was okay and not dead. There was a nurse and she was like in my ear like, "Are you okay? Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what day it is?" It was just like very upsetting. And I heard this nurse talking to some kind of nurse over here, and she was like, "Can you transfer the patient, blah blah blah." So then this nurse was taking me on the gurney or whatever you would call it, and she was definitely in her Friday feelings. She was complaining the whole time and stopping and talking to other coworkers and being like, "Can you believe they asked me to transfer this patient? Like, I'm done. I'm signing off. And why would they ask me?" She was very upset. And so we were stopping and complaining to her crew. I imagined her the whole time with a cigarette in her mouth, and then we're like banging into the elevator. It was very crazy. We made it to my room, and she found another nurse and was like, "Is this the room for the patient?" And the guy was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "Okay, just scooch over, hon." And I had zero scooch. Like, I had just been cut in half, so I didn't know what to do exactly. And I just started crying more and keeping my eyes shut. So then she was like, "All right," and asked the other nurse to hold one end of the sheet, and then she held one end, and they just kind of hammocked me onto my hospital bed. And then I was crying still, and I finally opened my eyes and I looked at the lady, and I kind of broke through to her, and she was like, safe recovery, hon, fast recovery. And that's the story of how I woke up out of anesthesia. Because the surgery went differently than planned, they kept me overnight in the hospital. The first night we did have a roommate on the other side of the curtain, but she was so quiet it was like she was barely there. And through my drug-induced haze, I questioned whether she really was. She spoke so quietly I could barely eavesdrop as the nurses quizzed her periodically. Eventually, I learned from their whispers that she was just visiting Toronto and was actually from Korea and planned to fly back there in just 2 days. Oh, no, a loud nurse and various doctors and other nurses reiterated to this travel way too soon after a major surgery. And each time, the girl would respond, like it was affirmative but also not. Like I hear you, but also, quite a power move. I have to remember to use it going forward. I never saw her except for her ankles and feet walking to our shared bathroom under the curtain. I pictured her on a plane resting, responding, to the flight attendants and maybe her mom, urging her to rest when she finally made it home. I realized I too existed as a background character for the very quiet roommate, except I was not quiet and I felt sorry for her, though hopefully it was a distraction at least from her pain. The first night I was there, the nurse said, I will see you at 6 a.m. and you will get up and you have to stand up because it's very important. And I laughed and said, like as if a person could ever stand up after being sliced in half. I thought that we were in on the joke together, but it turned out that morning she was not joking around at all and she insisted I do it. And I asked her how, mainly because I had been training for this by watching YouTube videos of log rolls, and I wanted to see if she had any extra information or hot tips. She did not. She showed me a very poor execution of a log roll without sharing any of the fundamentals, and honestly, I tried not to hold it against her. I somehow managed to sit up with her shouting directions and Jay hovering nearby with a very worried face, and I don't even know how to tell you, like, the pain was out of this world, like blinding. I made sounds like a gorilla losing her baby gorilla. Mournful, wild animal sounds. I literally saw stars like in a Disney movie. Little animated birds were circling my head. After making it to a sitting position, unbelievably, the nurse was not satisfied and insisted now I must stand up. This was one insane request, but I was so delirious with pain that all I could do was submit. I somehow managed to stand, which felt like being born again, and I lost most of my ability to hear, which is, I guess, the same as ears ringing, and both the nurse and Jay's voices sounded very quiet and far away. I took a few steps somehow, and I managed to make it back to bed, and it was kind of a blur, and honestly never as bad as that first try. I didn't really know anything about having surgery, but I would say now that from my experience, my one major piece of advice is to make sure the catheter is working if you have to have one. This was the one tube that they left in me after I woke up, and that first night I was in excruciating pain and I had to pee so bad. I had never had a catheter before and I thought I had to sort of like pee into it, like I had to take some sort of action on my part. So Jay held his phone to my ear and played waterfall sounds, and again, my poor roommate must have been like, wow, this gorilla is insane, please get me out of here. One of the nurses in the middle of the night I was crying to said, no, it just drains your bladder. You don't have to do anything. So we laughed and felt relieved, though I did not feel relieved and I couldn't sleep. The thing about a catheter is it is not a modern technological advancement. It is literally just a tube, like a garden hose really, connected to a plastic box. And if that garden hose does not have enough gravity on its side, it is useless. There's no mechanical suction or beep or alert if it is not functioning. So after 8 hours of agony, the morning nurse came in and raised the bed in preparation for the big sit-up, and the tube finally was angled down enough and all the pee started coming out. We were in shock staring at the tube like, wow, it's still going. It's still going. It was going so much that the nurse had to drain the box into a bowl and make 2 runs to the washroom to unload it. Finally, I felt relief. Like, my God, I told Jay if I get a bladder infection from this, I will sue. Because it was time for sitting and standing up, which I was still under the impression was a prank, it was also time to take the catheter out. And I was like, yeah, fine, it certainly wasn't helping. This was a disgusting event. I made the mistake of watching this process, and I can't unsee it. It was highly traumatic. I again made sounds I didn't know I was able to produce and felt immediately ashamed and sorry for my roommate on the other side of the curtain. My only advice for this is do not look at it coming out. Blech. I ended up spending 4 days in the hospital versus the day surgery we planned for. The surgeon said when they got in there, they couldn't even see any of my uterus because it was covered up by a giant cyst. She whipped out her iPhone to show me pics, and I hesitated, like, do I want to see this? But I looked, and so did Jay, and it was wild. It was also wild that she was just walking around with pictures of my insides on her iPhone. I felt proud and weirded out at the same time. The doctor said I should expect to feel a lot of relief now that everything they took out was gone. It ended up not being just laparoscopic with the 5 laser belly incisions, but they had to do a C-section to get all the big stuff out. Jay never left my side and slept in a weird chair and was an outfit repeater for 4 days. We really bonded and got closer, even though I didn't think that was possible. And it was so good to have someone there to help find the nurses when I was way overdue for pain meds. And then on the Sunday, it was a big, beautiful full moon, and we had a wonderful view from our room. When one of the nice doctors came to say hi in the morning, she ran through a lot of information and asked if I had any questions for her, and I said yes. Did she see the full moon? And she said she did on her way into work, and that it was very nice. And then she asked if I could see it from my window, and I said yes, I did. And I imagined that it was my ovary saying goodbye, and we laughed. The best nurses were Diamond and Chris. They both seemed young enough to be my children, and I thought of them in that way fondly. You could tell Diamond was an introvert, and she hovered near the curtain and couldn't wait to get out of there. But she was also all business, and I so appreciated her prompt care. Some of the nurses would chuck the individually wrapped meds onto the general area of my chest and leave me to flail around in the dark like a capsized turtle, trying to unwrap each pill and not lose it in the sheets while also reaching for water. What I dubbed the diamond difference was all the pills unwrapped, put in a little paper cup, and passed to me with a cup of water. Like, talk about first class. She took pity on me when I asked when I could have more pain meds, and when she checked and came back, she said, not for another hour, girl. And this girl felt like a big win in terms of our relationship building. She even let me know when she was finishing her shift and said goodbye. I wish I could send her actual diamonds as a thank you. Love you, Diamond. Butt explosion. I was eating a lot and anxious to get out of there, but the last checkpoint was proving I was able to pass gas. The doctors and nurses gave up asking if it happened, and we were all feeling quite defeated. This is when the angel nurse, Chris, appeared. If I had to choose an animal to compare Chris to, I would say a groundhog or like a prairie dog, maybe a marmot. This is the posture and height and overall energy that he embodied. So attentive. He popped up around the clock, standing ready at attention, wearing an adorable little Lululemon fanny pack and tasteful diamond stud earrings. He had an amazing amount of items stored in that fanny pack, similar to a Mary Poppins magic bag. He He took my gas passing difficulties as a personal challenge and started telling me about mythical cures he heard about on Nurse Talk. This is the kind of with it youth I need in my corner, I thought to myself. One of his recommendations was butter in coffee, which I was not too excited to try, though I was doing all the things everyone already recommended. Coffee, tea, lots of walks, gum. Did you know about this? Apparently gum helps, though it did not. Anyway, Chris told me about a drink he could give me that he basically dubbed a butt explosion, and we both agreed gleefully, yes, this is the drink I need. Let's do it. However, shortly after my main surgeon came in to check on me and I told her about the explosion drink I was feeling would really be the solution, and she shut it down and said no, that would not be good to have right now. And she said that she would go tell Chris not to do that. So I was worried this would jeopardize my blossoming relationship with him or even his career, but when he came back a few minutes later, he seemed at peace with the doctor's decision, and he just shrugged and said, well, we tried. Space Odyssey. I spent the rest of the day rolling around in bed, frustrated and feeling like I might pass gas any minute, but it just wasn't happening. I felt like such a failure, and I felt so bad Jay was stranded there with me, and that we could have been home days ago if I could only get it together and do something I usually try not to do but do very well. Above average most days, I would say. I could hear bubbles very low in my stomach, and I told Jay I was imagining hearing that space song with the drums. You know, the one that goes like ba-da, ba-da. And I was picturing big planets orbiting each other, like how the gas was moving around in there. I was waiting on a miracle, and Jay told me the song is actually from Space Odyssey, and he played it on his phone, and I said, yeah, that's it. I drifted off a little while later, and then when I woke up, it happened! The unmistakable sound. I locked eyes with Jay and asked him to confirm because I didn't trust my senses anymore, and he agreed it was real. I cried tears of joy, and Jay went to tell Chris to get the paperwork started because we were out of there. The checking out process took many hours, but I already expected that from spying on my old roommate's experience. I was sad to say goodbye to Chris, and when he asked if I wanted him to help cut off the hospital bracelet, I hesitated, like, should I keep this for the memories? Once he made the cut, I felt released like a dove. Chris told Jay he could get a wheelchair downstairs by the entrance, but when he tried, the nurses would not let him, and there seemed to be a drama about a shortage of wheelchairs and the floors the wheelchairs were allowed on. So I ended up having to make the trek on foot, but it was okay, and I was elated. I was so happy to take off the gross hospital gown and put on my spacious Amazon caftan. I will say when we got outside, it was quite scary though. Everything was way too bright and loud, and I was feeling quite vulnerable. I was worried about this part of the whole thing because I usually get car sick, and I hate being out in the world on a good day. But we got in a nice Uber, and the driver had concerned dad energy, which was good. It wasn't a very far drive, but every bump on the road was painful, and I was feeling quite wretched, and I just cried quietly under my sunglasses. Jay and the driver kept looking at me with worried faces. We finally made it with the one last leg of the challenge left, the lobby and the elevators. My favorite concierge was at the desk. He was luckily busy chatting to someone, but when we walked by, he looked very concerned, and he asked me if I was alright, which, as previously stated, is the password to the floodgates. So I began crying a lot, but assuring him I was fine, and Jay ushered me through the lobby to the elevator, saying he would explain later. Luckily, the elevator came pretty fast, which sometimes does not happen, and miraculously, it was empty. So, walking into our home was a religious experience. It was so nice and quiet and clean. I went straight to bed and just kind of cried quietly for a while. I was overwhelmed by everything that had happened and so grateful to be on the other side. Afterlife. Life has been pretty good since then. I've been feeling better and better each day, trying out watercolors, studying languages, playing lots of chess, catching up on Love Island, and napping a lot. I haven't been able to cook, and we got sick of takeout, so we started ordering these sort of ready-made meal deliveries for the week, which aren't too bad. I'm excited to get cleared from surgery and just get so shredded. I got my pathology back and cried because I was worried it had markers for ovarian cancer, but we researched it and it seems okay, hopefully. I meet with my surgeon in a few weeks to go over everything, and yeah, I'm just gonna hopefully get amazing. I feel I'm going bald, so I've been back on my hair witchcraft, like rosemary water and oiling, and the rosemary tints my hair kind of brown, but maybe that means it's working. So if you're going through something like this, or you're waiting for surgery, or you had any kind of surgery and can relate, I hope you're okay, and I want you to know it's very possible you will be okay. And I'm sending you all the best wishes and healing vibes your way. Thanks for watching.